the Romans weren't fighting wars to bring Jupiter to the world. Like, we have to fight because you're not worshiping Jupiter. You're worshiping somebody else. You're worshiping Zeus. Zeus is a false god. You have to worship Jupiter. Not only did the Romans not fight wars like that, they had exactly the opposite view. The Romans actually were very enthusiastic about religious syncretism, which was that everyone should respect other religions and see that Zeus, for example, and Jupiter, or Yahweh, are ultimately, if you had a monotheistic view of Jupiter and Zeus, rather than the philosophers, the pagan philosophers did tend toward monotheism, because actually monotheism is a logical outcome of philosophy. It was the unphilosophical sort of common people who believed in sort of this polytheism where there's just all these gods and they're kind of adolescent and, immature. And above all these gods, there's the ultimate divine source, which is actually not one of the gods. That's kind of like unphilosophical polytheism. But there were philosophers, and they were very good philosophers, probably the greatest philosophers in history in Greece and Rome, and there was a philosophical monotheism, which was something more that we would recognize. Actually, I think philosophical monotheism was even better than what I call tribal monotheism. Because if you look at the Middle East, you have monotheists, but they believe that only they are worshiping God, and everybody else worshiping a false god, or it's the devil, or some other really highbrow conception. And so therefore you basically have to kill other people because they're worshiping a false god, and so it's tribal monotheism. Whereas in the Greco-Roman world, and this includes some Jewish philosophers who were philosophical monotheists, where there's only one God, but that, just as it says in the Rig Veda, that one God is called by different names or invoked by different names in different cultures. So is really the philosophical monotheism, which was truly admirable, I think, much more than tribal monotheism. And in a sense, it's the tribal monotheism that led to the wars. I don't think you have so many polytheistic wars so even Alexander the Great had his one world project. If you know about Alexander the Great, his big inspiration, apart from just beating up everyone he met and, conquering them. Of course, if you surrendered, he wouldn't beat you up. He would, shake hands, no hard feelings. We now control you. So, but Alexander had this enthusiasm to unite the world. And both Alexander and the Romans, who supplanted the Greeks as the great power in that part of the world, were religious syncretists. They didn't want religious fanaticism, especially the Romans. Actually, and Alexander, because if you look at, Alexander, sorry for all this history, but it's kind of interesting. Alexander, of course, as we know, was a, the country he came from. No. It's a Greek. I can't believe I just forgot. It's a country today.
Cyprus?
No. It's here. 1 second. I'll tell you in a second. This is embarrassing. It's a word. I know. It just somehow or other. It's just kind of like Macedonian. Of course. My God, that was not age related. It's just that I had all these ideas in my head. So, it was part of the Greek world roughly, but he was a Macedonian. The Greeks were very much into their city-states. Alexander was more, in his thinking and his approach, was actually more like a Roman, in the sense that he thought of large-scale organization and large-scale political structures, which the Greek city-states didn't. It's like the Athenians. They had, city leagues and everything, but Alexander and the Romans thought in very large-scale political structures. And because they thought in terms of large-scale political structures, they really wanted people to respect each other's religions. because you can't build large-scale empires and societies if, stupid people are killing each other over religious fanaticism. And that's why Tacitus, the great Roman historian, roughly at the time of Jesus, maybe, just slightly after Jesus, but roughly the same period, who was a Roman senator and considered one of the great historians in history. In the last chapter of his great histories, he just really kind of goes on a rampage, and he says that if these fanatical Middle Eastern religions spread in the Roman, in our Roman civilization, it's going to ruin everything. And he turned out to be right. Because when one particular Middle Eastern religion, under the guardianship of Constantine the Emperor, became the religion of the Roman Empire, one of the first things they did was to abolish religious freedom. Of course, they had been persecuted also, so they said, well, it's better to persecute than to be persecuted. Anyway, but generally there was this idea of religious syncretism. And so therefore, if you look at the Greco-Roman world, you would not say that religion is the cause of wars. If you looked at the history of South Asia, of India, you would not say it. Because actually, in the Indo-European world, there was religious freedom.